Welcome. We are here today to discuss the intersection of philosophy and literature. Our guest speaker is Derek Matravers, who's professor of philosophy at the Open University. He has written Art and Emotion, 1998, Introducing Philosophy of Art, 8 Case Studies, 2013, Fiction and Narrative, 2014, and Empathy, 2017. He is the author of numerous articles on aesthetics, ethics, and philosophy of mind. Welcome, Derek. Nice to have you.
Very nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Sure. Well, the first question I had for you here was, how would a philosopher define literary fiction?
This is the sub-branch of philosophy, I guess, started in around, well, at least had its modern incarnation from around 1990, when a couple of noted philosophers, Kendall Walton and Greg Curry, published books in this area. And I think there's been two ways that they've defined it. And the one way is to say, well, it's to do with the different ways in which readers, so you pick up a book, and if it's a fiction book, then you're supposed to imagine the content or make believe the content. And if you pick up a non-fiction book or a newspaper, then you're supposed to believe the content. And that makes some kind of sense, because if you read Marianne was deserted by Willoughby in a Jane Austen novel, you're not going to believe that. But if you read in the newspaper that the roads are going to be shut at 8 o'clock this evening, then it'd be worthwhile believing that if you want to go out. So that's one way of doing it. And the other way of doing it is to say, basically, it's the difference between stuff. Fiction, you're allowed to make stuff up, and non-fiction, you're not allowed to make stuff up. And the difference is that in the second way, it doesn't really have to do with the mental states of the reader. It just has to do with the process that the writer went through. So if the writer goes through a process where they're kind of not allowed to make stuff up, then they're producing non-fiction. If they go through a process of being able to make stuff up, then they're producing fiction. And actually, and then you can see, they're not really definitions, actually, but the second in particular is not really a definition. I'd say the way I'd put it would be this, is that human beings are storytellers. And there's sort of broadly two traditions of storytelling, one where you're allowed to make stuff up and one where you're not supposed to make stuff up. And that's broadly fiction and non-fiction. And I prefer the second approach. Can I carry on and tell you why I prefer the second approach?
Sure, go, carry on.
The problem I have with the first approach, so the first approach, just to remind you, is to say that in fiction we're supposed to imagine stuff, and in non-fiction we're supposed to believe it. Is that I struggle to find a conception of imagination that's going to really do that job, because it seems to me that if you're reading a non-fiction about the fall of the Roman Empire, you're going to be using your imagination. And if you're reading a fiction, you're going to be using your imagination. And having to try and come up with a difference between those two senses of imagination that's going to do the work to distinguish fiction and non-fiction seems to me a very tough job.
Yeah, there might be a kind of a political divide too. I was thinking, say we don't talk about the fall of the Roman Empire, but we talk about the fall of the American Empire or the British Empire. And, some people might say, well, it was all the Tories' fault, or it was Labor or the Republicans or the Democrats. And you might be sincere and you might pass a lie detector test, but you still might be making it up because.
Yeah, actually, that is true. I think, that's a very good point, because one of the things that gets slightly neglected in this debate is that the category of non-fiction is a very broad and weird category in many ways. So, as you say, non-fictions are going to include things that are very controversial, and they're also going to include things that are just completely weird and unbelievable. So, James I, the James I of England and IV of Scotland, wrote his book on witchcraft, which probably doesn't contain many things that anybody would believe. Now, so that's non-fiction. That's almost entirely, in one sense, made up, even though in writing it as non-fiction, to be fair to the people who have this definition, he probably intended people who read it to believe it. But nonetheless, there's nothing in there that I mean, any reader reading that now it's just going to be a fanciful exercise of the imagination to try and reconstruct whatever it was that James I was on about.
Yeah, and you know, Wilkie Collins, 19th century novelist who had kind of anti-woman feelings in his soul. He sometimes has a mystery that rolls because the woman didn't keep her place, and
Right.
and if she had kept her place, nobody would have been killed, and so forth. So there might be another level of saying something being untrue. That is, you might be depicting in your story a set of relations and whatnot that are just like your witchcraft. And
Yeah, I mean that seems to me right. There's both fictions and non-fictions seem to me to be I mean, surely not just seem to me, surely are a patchwork of things that we're supposed to believe or supposed to not believe. So I bet you Wilkie Collins, in writing those books, intended his audiences or his readers to go along with his worldview, to believe that his views about women. There's I live in Cambridge in England, and there's a novel set around here, Waterland by Graham Swift, which is basically a history of the East Anglian landscape. And I'm sure he intended us to believe almost everything in it. But then again, so there's lots of stuff we're supposed to believe in works of fiction. And then if you go to non-fictions, even the stuff that there's going to be stuff that the author didn't intend us to believe. So there's going to be hyperbole and metaphor and thought experiments, extemporizations, all kinds of things. So these things are patchworks, mosaics of both truth claims and not truth.
yeah, a second question I had for you is that philosophers often obsess about fiction, and you think that this is often a mistake. Can you explain why?
Yeah, I can sort of see why fiction is an attractive. It's got this kind of nice philosophical sort of taste to it, because you think, well, surely there's nothing problematic about nonfiction because people are just trying to tell us how the world is. And fiction, they're trying to tell us, they're trying to spin a world for us, and there's obviously some truth in that. But I think if you look at the problems that philosophers have discussed about fiction, so here's a paradigm problem which has occupied a lot of time of a lot of philosophers, which is the thought that because fictional characters don't exist, there's something strange or something that needs explaining about our emotional reactions to them. How can we pity these characters, these suffering characters in fiction, given that we know they don't exist? But I find it very, I mean, I've never really understood really pinned down what the problem is, because it can't be the thought that we can't have emotional reactions to things we don't believe exist. Because I mean, I spend a lot of the time dreading what tomorrow will bring, in terms of administration meetings or something else. So those don't exist, but we can surely have emotional reactions to the future. So it's not that we can't have emotional reactions to things that don't exist. So if there is a problem, it's a problem with something. Okay, there is something. So what would be the problem? Is it going to be a different problem from me feeling sorry for Cleopatra? So Cleopatra existed however many thousand years ago in the sands of ancient Egypt. And I can't really see that there's an in principle problem of my feeling sorry for, say, Anna Karenina that doesn't also make it look a little weird that I feel sorry for Cleopatra. I don't think it's actually weird in either case. I just think, we can, as part of coming to grips with representations, whether fiction or non-fiction representations, part of what happens to us. So you pick up a book, you read the little words on the page, and you start representing the content of the story in your head. And part of representing the content to ourselves is surely having emotional reactions to the characters in the story. And it doesn't strike me that there's some terrible problem with fiction that isn't also a problem for people in the very, very distant past, or non-fiction books about the distant future, worrying about what generations, 10, 20 years, generations down the line because of climate change and things. There is something to be said about our feeling emotions for characters who are not in the here or now. But I don't think the difference is whether they're fictional characters or non-fictional characters. I think the difference is whether they're represented characters or whether they're characters that we bump into in our environment. Maybe different stories have to be told in each case, but I can't see the big crucial difference being the fiction non-fiction difference as opposed to some other difference.
Would it help at all to take a bit of a Platonic tack and say that you're kind of thinking, say in the case of empathy, you're thinking that there are a limited number of ways that people can react, and you're saying this story is telling one of those ways, and they're kind of universal truths and maybe atemporal truths and so forth. And then it doesn't really matter so much that you're talking about someone you've actually ever seen or heard. And
yeah, I mean, that seems to me exactly right. I think there's an interesting. I think I've changed my mind a bit about since I wrote that book on empathy that you very kindly mentioned at the beginning. But I now think that there's, to be honest, I haven't really worked all this through, but I'm getting more convinced by philosophers who think that there's something special about our face-to-face relations of empathy that is slightly different from our empathy that we feel in cases where we have a person we meet in a book, so either removed from us by being a fictional character or removed from us by being a historically very different, historically very distant character. Because there seems to me I mean, in some cases, there's all the difference in the world between a face-to-face event and a represented event. So if you're face-to-face with a lion chasing you, if you're face-to-face with a roaring lion, that is a very different experience from your being face-to-face to reading about a roaring lion, whether you're reading a fiction or a non-fiction. And that difference seems to blow the difference between fiction and non-fiction completely out of the water. I mean, that is a real difference there. I think that difference does extend to other relations, like empathy.
Yeah, a problem that's come up in the United States recently relating to the idea of real lived experience as opposed to imagined or possibly fabricated is when you have a group, say a socioeconomic group or a racial group or religious group or somebody that has a particular story, and someone outside the group, which is to come and write about somebody else's story, and they haven't lived it. Is that legitimate?
Yeah, I that's I don't know. It'd be nice to know what you think about that. I mean, I'm sort of in two minds about that. I mean, I can see that groups who historically feel marginalized and ignored, it's just one more bit of offense or one more bit of nuisance that if somebody comes along and then starts telling their stories on their behalf. But on the other hand, it seems to me that if it would be a less good world if people weren't allowed to explore, as long as they're doing it seriously, weren't allowed to explore the issues of people who not like themselves. I mean, it would be, I think it would be a real pity if, only people of group X could represent group X's experience, because people from group Y, as long as they do it seriously and what results is something that's not sensationalized, something of quality that's worth thinking about. I think there is merit in one group exploring another group's lived experience.
I tend to agree with you. I have a novel called Georgia, and it's a rather long novel. And before each of the books, and there's 12 books, obviously, and and each book has 12 chapters in it. And before book 11, there's people in the Highgate pub in north of London there, and they're talking and they're arguing about this. And the guy, they're theater people, and one guy says, "I'd have to quit my job in the Shakespeare Company because I'm not Elizabethan, and I couldn't show this." And the other one is trying to take the view, and they're having a little argument with a pint of bitters about this, but and try to give it both sides a bit of a show. But I think I like the idea of being serious, and by serious maybe another sense of empathy is really trying to get in and intellectually and emotionally understand a worldview.
Yeah. I mean, that seems to be right. I mean, I think it would be presumptuous. I mean, it would be presumptuous to write from the point of view of another person without having made some effort to understand that point of view of the other person. And I can see that sometimes the other person might find that patronizing. Sometimes, maybe we can't. But it would be a terrible thing if we stopped trying. So I mean, it sounds like you're exploring deep philosophical themes in your novels, so it can be done.
Yeah, it says to put a light note on the idea of empathy, because I always like to mix in a bit of humor whenever I can. Is the that Irish expression, "Don't judge anybody until you walked a mile in their shoes." Well, it's very true, because if you've walked a mile in their shoes, you've got a mile head start on them. And if they want to get you, plus you've got their shoes, they're going to be even slower.
Yes, very true. I love the Irish pragmatic view of the world.
Yes. And another view very popular among philosophers, unfortunately, is what I call the Carnap sympathizers. Carnap famously said that art, and particularly fiction, was like dessert after the real meal, which was philosophy, direct discourse, logical philosophy. And he says, actually, it's even worse than that. It's not just the dessert; it's the whipped cream on top of the dessert.
Right. Yeah. I that is not a view to which I will sign up. It is, well, I mean, you're a case in point. It is perfectly possible to explore all kinds of things about our situation here on Earth, the human condition, and even lighter things, without in fiction. Which is not to say that all fiction has to be like that. I love P.G. Wodehouse, who described himself as the performing flea of English literature, because I don't think he thought his books had much serious, substantial content. Which is not to say that he wasn't an absolutely brilliant writer. I think as a stylist and handler of plot, he's fantastic.
What did he write, about 92 books or something like that?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I must have read about 45 of them, about half of them or so. But I find them very useful to understand Donald Trump, because the royalty, and in America, the royalty is determined by the number of zeros in your bank account. The royalty are all stupid, and someone else deserved whatever they got, a title or land or something. So it's all undeserved, and it just keeps going because of power and entitlement that you did nothing to earn. And so that makes me think of Donald Trump, because his father had a business that was worth something like $3 billion in today's money when he died. And according to Forbes magazine, that same business is down 2/3. Trump has lost 2/3 of the value. Right. just collecting rents and so forth is not too difficult. The things that he tried on his own, buying an airline and casinos and so forth, they all went bankrupt. So
right. So, well, I'm glad to think even P.G. Wodehouse has lessons to tell us, which is
yeah.
Yes,
So that's why I went P.G. Wodehouse and then the Batman comic book are the two ways I understand Donald Trump. That is the character of the Joker, who just likes to destroy things.
Right. There, you see, if that it can be done for those two as to think that it's a serious endeavor reading them, then I'm sure that just shows that Carnap is completely wrong. There's a book by Norman Douglas called South Wind, a novel, where there's one of the characters does say has the Carnap view of fiction, and Norman Douglas sends him up sort of rather nicely in the novel. So
yeah, it's certainly interesting, and I think there was a literary critic in the United States who coined the term machete principle, and he thinks that you get like a machete as a critic, and you just use that one machete and solve all problems. And if you asked a philosopher, say you were doing a job interview, hiring someone, and you ask this person's coming in, well, what do you think of literature? What's your favorite novel? And if they said novel, something like that, scratching their head or something, then you might know that you might not want him in your department and send him into social sciences or something, economics. Yeah, I don't
know. That seems right to me, and also I think it works. It works the other way too, because there are non-fictions. I mean, there's novels which are serious explorations of the world, and they're novels that are sort of, as Graham Greene said, entertainments, of some of his own novels. But I think the same is true of non-fiction. I mean, they're non-fictions which the motivation a motivation to read them will be to discover something about what it is you're reading about. But there are plenty of non-fictions that the motivation is just to pass time on the aeroplane or something. I mean, there's some great, and when you read the back of a non-fiction, it often doesn't say this is a meticulous list of the facts involved in the 19th century. It'll say this is a page turner, this reads like a novel, these are people who are incredibly interesting characters, and so on and so forth. But again, it'd be interesting, I don't know if anybody's ever done this work, but it'd be interesting to find out what the motivations were of people reading fiction and people reading non-fiction. Because sometimes philosophers write as if the only motivation for reading non-fiction is going to be to find out about the world. But my guess is that the motivations are going to be similar in both cases, that it's going to be both can be very entertaining, both can help you understand the world, can help you reflect. And so going back to that earlier question you asked me, that I think the differences between fiction and non-fiction are not as big as sometimes philosophers make out.
Yeah, and if so, then the way we view the two texts might be very more similar than some would like to think. That the textuality might be more similar.
Yeah, I do think that's right.
Wow, we've come to the end of our discussion, and it certainly has been an interesting one. I really thank you, Derek, for taking some time and going over some what I think are some really important issues in philosophy and literature.
Well, thanks again for inviting me. It's very nice to talk to you, who, of course, you have a foot in both camps. So
yes,
very good to talk to you. Nice to see you, Michael.
You take care.
And you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.